Good evening. Today we will talk about the lives of two prominent women in Windsor history. One a scientist who broke down educational barriers placed there because of, as she said, prejudice on the part of the unfair sex. And the second a physician and clairvoyant who at a very early age, much to the concern of her parents, had unusual powers of healing. I'm Miriam Pleva, and with me to discuss these two women are Bob Silliman, Director of the Windsor Historical Society, and Ted Andersen, historian for First Church in Windsor. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne.
Let's start with Flavia, because I think we probably have more interesting stories about her. What do we know about Flavia Thrall, Bob?
Well, it's interesting that these two ladies we've selected to talk about this morning were born both on what is now Pequannock Avenue, a little over a mile apart, and only 9 years separated their ages. Flavia was born in 1838 and died in 1910. She's born in a small house that stood on what is now an area just south of the I-91 interchange on Pequannock Avenue. The house built by Dr. Timothy Phelps was built in 1815 and it was torn down around 1969. At the tender age of 14, Flavia Howe, who eventually married Ed Thrall, began her career as a spiritualist healer and practiced her art for 55 years. She kept an office in Hartford where she prescribed herbal preparations when medicine was necessary and was consulted by physicians, clergymen, lawyers, and professionals. Quoting from Mrs. Thrall's obituary when she died in 1910, Mrs. Thrall, whose magnetic personality and powers as a spiritualistic healer have won for her a wide reputation, was one of the most highly respected women in the town of Windsor. She never advertised her profession, but her reputation became known so that patients from every state in the Union and many foreign countries consulted her. She gave to those who could not visit her what is known as the absent treatment, which proved very successful. Mrs. Thrall organized what was known as the Spiritual and Harmonial Society of Windsor in 1861. This group was so successful that they built what was called Liberty Hall on West Street in Pequannock. The building still stands today and is owned by St. Casimir's Lithuanian Society. Because of loss of members and lack of interest, the Spiritualist Society disbanded shortly after the death of Mrs. Thrall, and their assets were turned over to the Second School Society.
I wonder if, seeing they were neighbors, do you think that Christine Ladd Franklin used the services of Mrs. Thrall? Was she called Dr. Thrall?
She was called Doctor. I doubt that Christine Ladd Franklin did, however, because she left home rather early for an education. However, they both had friends and relatives on Pequannock Avenue, so certainly they knew of each other.
What did she die from? She was 62 years old when she died. She was a healer. I wonder why she wouldn't have been able to heal herself.
I
wonder what...
I have not seen on the record what she died of. I think that her profession was such that many of the townspeople participated, and I mentioned that she had what she called the absent treatment, and this was a treatment that she used for people out of town and out of state, and it was done entirely through the United States Post Office with letters.
That must have been kind of difficult, because I had read that she would hear the person's problem, go into a trance, and then give her diagnosis, so through the mail it must have been a little more difficult.
And apparently she did that by asking that the patient send in some personal object, sometimes a piece of hair, and I've read that whoever did that had to be very careful that no one else handled it, whether it was a part of her personal clothing or her clipping from her hair, that she had to do it herself and put it in an envelope and mail it.
Another person's touch would taint it then?
Apparently.
Yes.
And then upon receipt, she would treat it the same as if the patient was in the room with her and go into a trance. And she always hired a secretary. She always claimed that she could not remember anything she said during her trance. The secretary would take down a prescription for medicine when it was called for.
It's fascinating. Do you think that kind of healing was a little more accepted, though, back then? I mean, there were more people around that were doing that kind of thing, weren't there?
It was very popular. I mentioned the fact that she never advertised, but there were spiritualists that advertised in the Hartford Courant to serve that same purpose, and they were, I've seen one that's from as far away as Providence, that you could write and ask for help in your illness. I brought with me this morning one of her receipts or recipes. This one happens to be a kidney recipe.
Kidney recipe?
A kidney recipe.
For a kidney ailment?
Kidney ailment. I'm not going to read all the ingredients, but because there's 8 or 10 of them, it starts out with a half a pound of anise seed, a half a pound of elder, dwarf elder, a half a pound of queen of meadow, a quarter of a pound of spearmint, and several other things, sassafras and juniper and bitters. But then the means of making the medicine was to put into a 5-gallon jar and pour on warm water and stand 12 hours. Then add water enough to make 3 gallons. When done, add to each gallon 1/2 pint of alcohol, 1.5 pints of gin, and 1/8 ounce of iodide potassium.
This is for a kidney problem. All that liquor and alcohol in there.
Instant cure, perhaps. But we find these recipes in many of the estates here in Windsor. I have a couple of them home that came from a relative also. But they were very popular, and people swore by them that they did work.
Bob, I have a question here. There's mention here of these followers of Flavia holding socials at the homes of different members. We continued our lectures enjoying the best speakers obtainable. By holding socials and fairs and with gifts of money and work from those interested, we were able to build a new hall that you mentioned, now St. Casimir's Lithuanian Society on West Street. Sounds like Pequannock was a hotbed almost of clairvoyance.
I think it was. We have a list of some of the local members that were participating, and it included a good many of the original families in town.
So they weren't considered quacks. I mean, that was a pretty respected profession.
It was a respected profession. And in fact, I have also read that one of President Lincoln's spiritualist advisors came to Pequannock for training under Flavia Thrall.
Right here.
Vice President
Mrs.
Lincoln.
Nettie Coburn became in the capacity of a medium to Abraham Lincoln.
Well, maybe that's where Nancy Reagan got the idea. How about her husband's occupation? Was he involved in this? Did he help her in any way?
As far as I know, he did not. He participated and supported her, and I know provided some of the financial help that was necessary in the society. He was probably active in the society, but not as a spiritualist per se, as his wife was. He was a farmer, I think, in town. He lived just above where Flavia was born, in the house that became known as the Merwin House, and then Hubble Brown lived there before it was torn down when the I-91 went through, right through the location.
Is that brick Victorian house, but where the bridge is?
No, it was on the other side of the street, on the east side, and the highway went right through.
Hubble was married to her niece, or married
her granddaughter.
Oh, the granddaughter. So his children, who run Brown's now, are
a direct line back from Flavia. Yes.
Right. Do you think the husband grew the herbs, or were they grown in Windsor, or where did they come from?
Some of them undoubtedly were available locally, but one of the main sources of herbs for medicinal purposes was down in the old Griswold drugstore on North Main Street and Trumbull Street in Hartford, which was still operating up until World War II, I think, when it was torn down, when they put the highway through down there.
Well, it's interesting that her house went for the highway, the school, at least one of the schools that she went to went for the highway. And then, where was Miss Williams Seminary? Because I had read that that was another place, a private school.
Yes, she started in the Thrall School and went to the seminary, a private school, a girls' school, and that was located in what 20th century people remember as the Campbell School at the corner of Elm Street and Windsor Avenue, right in the center.
Yeah,
It was started originally by...
You remember it?
I remember it. I never went there, Ted, but I remember seeing it.
It was started by H. Sidney Hayden, and then the Williams sisters took it over, and later it became the Campbell School for girls.
Did you say earlier that she had people from around the country and around the world or
Yes,
subscribing to her?
and of course this was done by mail.
It was quite a business.
She had quite a following. It was, the whole spiritualistic concept was very popular from the Civil War time up to the turn of the century, and then it kind of died out.
If that other lady was a medium down in the White House or a consultant for Lincoln, and she was here, that would mean that these people were in contact all across the country. This movement was large, and
It
she
was.
probably talked with people all over the United States.
And they interchanged speakers
Right.
that they would bring in from afar to speak locally. And
So I wonder that this group probably had no ties to a church then. I mean, it was sort of like its own religion.
I believe so. And they did not believe at that time that Christianity was doing its part, and they were hoping to improve on life in general, I think.
I did. I looked her up in the First Church record book. She wasn't in there.
No.
So
Can't write about her, huh, in the First Church article?
not that one. No, she's not there.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about Christine. Well, I know, I was going to ask you one other thing. Are there any interesting stories of either her healing or, some success stories? Or her clairvoyance?
Unfortunately, I can't quote any.
Yeah.
I've read some successful experiences and some that weren't as successful. So I guess it worked both ways, as today's medicine also functions.
Yeah.
Different things for different people, I suppose.
Yes.
She had predicted the blizzard of '88. You know
Yes.
what year
She
that
did.
was.
Yeah.
And the Chicago fire, but I don't know what year that was.
Uh-huh.
And then she also predicted the death of a playmate, I think.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That was drowned, I believe. Yes. So
She had powers.
So if we can go to Christine Ladd Franklin, would you see any
Yes.
similarities in this life of hers?
Well, I just became familiar with Christine Ladd Franklin. I don't know if we can close in on that. Just sort of.
hold on.
She was born in Windsor in 1830, and died in New York in 1847. She's a graduate of Vassar College. She was the first woman to complete her work for a PhD. And she was a psychologist, a logician, and developed a theory of color vision. She had quite a life and seemed to be at home in almost anything that she got involved with. And I think one of the things that's most interesting that I found out, as a logician, she has been regarded as the greatest logician since Aristotle. And she developed a form of rebuttal known as an antilogism, which I quote. I don't profess to understand it, and I don't think we should discuss it further anyway. Which is an inconsistent triad of propositions and logic, of which two are premises of a valid syllogism, while the third is the contradiction of its conclusion. We'll leave it alone. She just seemed to be able to fit into these fields that she found interesting and go all the way to the end with them. Her theory of color vision, even today, is regarded very highly still by Dr. Edwin Land up in Massachusetts, who developed the Polaroid Land camera. She was a great niece of John M. Niles. And he was postmaster for President Van Buren in the United States. Postmaster General. And the United States Senator. So She came from capable background and went a long way with the abilities she was given. What do you know about her, Bob? Anything that...
One thing I wanted to, I'm not sure, I didn't hear the dates of her death and birth.
She was born in Windsor in 1847 and died in New York City in 1930.
Okay. And as you stated, her great-uncle was John M. Niles. Her father started one of the first industrial plants in Windsor on Mill Brook in 1825.
What was that?
His name was Richard Niles, and he started a silk mill.
Okay.
On Phelps Brook, which is just a small brook in front of the Moses Niles home where these people were all born. When I say these people, it's John M. Niles, his brother Richard Niles, who was the father of Christine Ladd Niles, all born in the Moses Niles house, which is at 1257 Pequannock Avenue. This brook was across the street, and this is where they built their first plant. And her father Richard stayed in business all his life.
So the plant was across the street on the property that they later built a second home. Am I confused?
No, the Moses Niles home is on the west side and is still there.
Mm-hmm. And it's a brownstone house. Right.
Yes.
And then, didn't they later build a house across the street?
No, the house across the street was the Ladd house, and she married, that is, Christine's mother married a Ladd.
Right, but she had lived in both houses.
She was born in the Niles homestead, yes.
Yeah.
She did graduate from Vassar in 1869, Ted.
Right, and she completed a 4-year degree in 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And in 1878, she was admitted to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, which was not accepting women at the time, but she pulled a few strings, and because of papers she had written and her experience in math, etc., they arranged to have her admitted. However, she earned her Ph.D. at Johns Hopkins, but it wasn't until 1926 that they recognized it, and Johns Hopkins awarded the degree.
Mm-hmm. She was 79 years old.
Yeah, well, we know because that was the unfair sex that was doing all that, right? But it's amazing how many barriers she did break down, and she must have had an awful lot going for her.
Well, she also studied...
She was allowed to get into places that women weren't allowed to.
Yes.
At Göttingen and also in Berlin, and she was also in Who Was Who in America. So I guess she was in Who's Who in America. If you look it up now, it's Who Was Who. There's people who are deceased. And she did get a write-up in that as Ladd Franklin Christine, scientist born at Windsor, Connecticut. Her theory of color vision, known as the Ladd Franklin theory. She contributed the doctrine of antilogism to logic, and was married to a professor also, who came out of Hopkins.
Yes, she met him there, and then they moved to New York City, where they had a daughter. The society was fortunate, and back in 1977, 2 or 3 years after Christine's daughter's death, we received a half a trailer load of antiques out of their apartment on Riverside Drive in New York City, along with many papers.
It's amazing that she remembered the Windsor Historic Society because her ties really weren't that strong to Windsor, were they?
No, that she had left at a relatively early age, but the family ended in New York City. Christine's daughter never married, and she was the last of that line.
And Christine was an only child?
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if Flavia was an only child.
I wonder.
No, I don't know.
That would be interesting.
I know they had children. Flavia had children.
And Mrs.
3 children, and only one of those survived. So.
And Mrs. Ladd Franklin was on the faculty at Columbia University when she was 79 years old. So she remained active for a long, long time.
Yeah, and lived a very
So I think it's rather interesting that here are 2 women born within 9 years of each other, living a little over a mile apart on Pequannock Avenue, entered such diverse fields, but in their own right became very successful.
Yeah.
And they all started their education in the Pequannock schools.
And they both went to that Thrall school?
No, Christine went to the Elm Grove School. the building, which no longer exists. There is an old Elm Grove school there, the corner of Prospect Hill Road and Pequannock Avenue. It was the school south of Prospect Hill Road that preceded the present one that is now the Grange Hall.
Okay.
Was south of Prospect Hill Road.
Right along Pequannock Avenue, between the brook and Pequannock Avenue. We have an 1859 map showing its location there.
But the White House, well, I guess we'd call it a Victorian house. I'm not sure the date that it was built. That people might remember, although this movie's really not too available. The movie Parish was filmed in part there, and they used
And
that
the Ladd House, yes.
Right.
I remember seeing Claudette Colbert. She was there in person acting on the porch.
Oh, really? Did you go over to kind of
No, but I
check
remember
everything
them
out?
yelling over. We were sitting on the Niles lawn.
Watching.
And I remember the director, what do you call these people that run TV shows, Marianne?
I don't know.
Calling over with
Rich.
his megaphone. to,
Those
"Keep
TV
quiet,
shows anyway."
Keep quiet, we're picking up the conversation.
Were there lots of Windsorites there kind of
Oh,
hanging
yes,
over?
we all,
Hanging
it
over
was
the
quite a
brook.
summer. Yes.
Yeah, everybody wanted to get a job as an extra somewhere.
Yeah. I don't think that movie, I know that Loomis has a copy, like a videotape. I'd love to.
Chaffee Girls were in it. I remember
Yeah.
seeing their scene, yeah.
But it's not too available. Because it would be nice to show in Windsor again.
It would be. And I've never seen it in video
No.
stores for rent.
But anyway, that was long after she had left.
1961? No, before 1960, I guess they filmed that.
Parish, was
Yeah.
it? I've forgotten. But one other thing, I mentioned that these two ladies came from that area, and remember that was the center of the north end of town, Pequannock, for many, many years, the Elm Grove section. This is where all the families originally started and spread out from there, before the center moved up to what is now the center
So
of
you're saying that
Pequannock.
that center was more of a center? Or there were
yes,
two centers?
They had a hotel
Oh, yeah?
and a
On
school
Pequannock Avenue?
and a meeting house in front of the old Elm Grove Cemetery there. That was the center of town.
The meeting house is still there?
No,
No?
that's a little chapel
Oh, I
connected
see.
with the cemetery, but it was on that site that the meeting house stood up until the 1890s. The spiritualists met in that old meeting house for many years before they built their own hall up on West Street.
Was Christine a member of First Church? No, she
No, she
wasn't.
was
Or
not a
her
member.
parents. How about John Niles and all her relatives?
I looked them up. I did not find anybody in there.
Gee,
They
well.
would have been more inclined to belong up in Pequannock anyway. That's where they lived.
Well,
And I think,
Yeah.
John M. Niles, one of the things he did was to push for the new Constitution for Connecticut, barring the Congregational Church from, as a state church, so
I
to
see.
speak. That freedom of religion, this is one of the things he expressed.
Yes. He was an abolitionist too, wasn't he? And the
Just
founder,
before the Civil War, yeah.
founder of the Hartford Times,
Yes, yeah.
which is no longer.
So these are
Now you
two
have
interesting people, yes.
a house, a picture of a house.
Well,
I've forgotten
I
which house
have
this is.
a
This is
photograph of
Flavia's.
Flavia's home that she was born in, as I said before, just south of the I-91 interchange. The house was built in 1815. She was born in, 1830?
Christine Ladd Franklin,
No,
Pardon?
Flavia.
Flavia.
I had thought, and it's not a very large house. I had thought it was a larger house.
This was where she was born.
Oh.
When she married Ed Thrall, she moved a little north to a larger home, and also a 18th century.
So this
home.
one,
This actually was a newer home than the one she moved to, but when she married, but the one she moved into was a larger home.
yeah. And, oh, I know what else you have. You have something else of Flavius here too, don't you?
This
Oh, there it is, right
bottle,
there.
I don't know whether we've gotten that on camera or
We can
not,
try to get that on camera.
but this was a prescription that contains Flavia Thrall's label, declaring herself to be a clairvoyant physician. This was found 20 or 30 years ago in building that was being torn down in Hartford.
Oh, really?
Someone pulled it out, and I remember they sent it to town, and Carl Gosley received it and got a write-up in the paper on it.
Wow.
But this happened to be for, I think, a kidney ailment of some kind.
She went after those big ailments.
Are there any other of those around?
It's the only one that I know of, and I try to handle it very carefully.
I wonder if they had to be licensed or certified or anything to...
I understand that there were attempts to license them, and in some cases they were successful and some not, where they went before a board similar to a doctor starting his profession. And I have heard that Flavia was accepted to practice her medicine because of her knowledge.
Yeah.
Others perhaps were turned down as whatever.
Not as
I hate to
knowledgeable,
use the word quacks.
Heavens.
Yeah, with real doctors today, they can't do that. Determine, well, I guess they must have to take a test too, or not?
Oh, yes, surely. They have to pass their exam, same as lawyers, and
Yeah.
get their credits in college and
Doctors.
medical school.
Oh, yes.
You know?
In fact, I think, it's ironic that Christine Ladd Franklin was out of Hopkins, and this is the 100th anniversary of the Hopkins Medical School this year, as a place where real doctors are created.
Is that right?
Before that, it was studied under somebody, or it wasn't as formal as it is today. But this is where it really got its start, and after a century, it's still going.
Well, and John M. Niles was the same way. He practiced as a lawyer, but only as an intern. He went and worked with a established lawyer and law firm, and passed all the necessary tests and became a lawyer without graduate work or college work.
And then went on to the newspaper, right? He was a newspaper?
Yes, and a United States Senator and a few other things. Quite a
Judge of
liberal.
the Court of Hartford County, served in the General Assembly, Hartford Postmaster, United States Senator, Postmaster General in the cabinet of President Martin Van Buren, returned to the United States Senate, anti-slavery leader in this state.
So he was quite a liberal, really.
What?
He was quite
Yeah,
before his
it's,
time, so to speak, or same as
she had
Christine.
so many people in her family that achieved so much. Christine, we are jumping around a little bit here. But what did her daughter do? What were her accomplishments? Or did she?
I don't know them in detail. She did have a education, graduate college girl. I don't know the college she went to, but I don't know of any specifics that she accomplished.
Yeah. Well, I know that it said something that I read that both she and her mother were in the suffrage movement. So.
And they lived where? Near Riverside Drive, did you tell me?
Yes. Yeah. They must have lived there for 30 or 40 years. The original contact we had was through the daughter, Christine's daughter, and she invited 2 or 3 of the ladies from the society to go to New York and go through the apartment and select those items which they would like to have. So
That must have been fun.
and then after the daughter died, there was someone else occupying the apartment for 2 or 3 years, a friend of a friend and so forth. And we began to think that we were losing all those things. But suddenly one day in 1977, they called and said they were breaking up the apartment and come and get it.
So where is that? Is that on display now
Not permanently.
in the museum?
We have many of the pieces in the parlor of the Father House. We have a table that John M. Niles used when he was Postmaster General. We have several mirrors and pieces of furniture.
What's the biggest piece that you have that came out of that apartment?
Well, we have a chest, I guess it's a bookcase on a desk type of thing, a secretarial or a secretary that probably, although we're not absolutely sure, but was in the Moses Niles homestead. Then went to New York, and that dates to the late 18th century.
And that's in the Wilson Museum, right in
Yes.
that big room?
Right. But we have quite a number of pieces, plus a lot of Christine's papers and books that she had written.
Was that right? I didn't realize that
No,
they were in there also.
no, we have those.
They're packed away, they're not on display.
Yes, they're not in the family folder.
Sometime that would be an interesting thing to do a little bit of research about, see what's in there and
Right.
maybe come across
If we
something
could
else.
understand her theories, huh? That would be pretty
I don't
complicated.
profess
some-
ever to be able to do that.
Some of
but
these books.
A lot of the fun in doing this is discovering things.
Mhm.
You don't know what's packed away or what's in
Yeah.
there until you actually go and look, and sometimes people have never seen these things before, and that's why you don't know that they're there.
Yeah.
No one's ever...
Now, on the other hand, I wonder if Flavia Thrall had a booklet of remedies, or if they're just, she would write them individually.
I've never heard that. She did
Yeah.
not produce a book of remedies. They were done on an individual basis, yes. And as all spiritualists, I suppose they claim that they knew nothing of what was going on. This came from someplace, and she repeated these formulas or recipes, and they were
Yeah.
written down and were
Uh-huh.
successful.
Just quickly, we haven't too much
Yeah,
time
we
left.
have just a few seconds.
That's the medium, from out there to here, and it went through them, and
That's about it, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, I hope people enjoy these Windsor history shows, and I hope you'll come back and do